We had a Bureau of Narcotics chief almost 100 years ago named Harry Anslinger. He was a racist. He was a xenophobe. He was the one that, in effect, drove marijuana, hemp and marijuana, all towards being a controlled substance and being illegal, because it was this moralistic, this sort of paternalistic and moralistic perspective on American society. So that's where it was driven. It was deemed to be this very harmful plant. Well, here we are, 100 years later, give or take 10 or 15 years. And we know that the plant's not harmful. In fact, it's actually beneficial to your endocannabinoid system in your body, which interacts with the plant.
Hi, and welcome to the Awakening series. My name is Kimberly Archuleta. Today we have an honored guest. His name is Robert Hoban. Robert is the chair of the Cannabis Group of Clark Hill, and the president and founder of Gateway Proven Strategies, GPS. Robert, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate everything that we're going to talk about. But I'm just so excited. I actually, of course, knocked on your door via LinkedIn, and I saw your wonderful bio. I was like, oh my goodness, I have to have him on the show. So we do bring brilliant minds together, and obviously you're a wonderful, brilliant mind, and I can't wait to tap into that mind. So thank you so much for your time today.
Kimberly, it's my pleasure. It's good to be here, and congratulations on the good work you're doing with this series. I've become a fan. So
thank you very much so. Okay, well, let's get into it, Robert. I can't wait to hear all about your journey and how you got to where you are today. If you can give us a little bit of insight on your journey.
Sure. Well, I'm a lawyer, so that's an easy place to start, right? I grew up in New Jersey. I attended Rutgers University. Out of college, I worked for the U.S. government and had an opportunity to transfer out to the Western United States, which I did gladly, because I'm very interested in climbing mountains. I do a lot of backpacking, mountain biking, etc. And New Jersey doesn't exactly provide for all of that as much as Colorado does. So I ended up attending law school, worked in a large firm for a few years, and my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2005. So then that led me to obviously a caretaker role in that respect, but also looking very closely at how cannabis can help cancer patients. And this was many years ago, 2005 to 2008. I don't think the information was as readily available, certainly not known to me, about the things that cannabis can do for cancer patients. But that was a blessing. And getting through that, helping my mom live for, as I mentioned, about 3 years with pancreatic cancer, when she was told she had 6 months to live, was indeed a great thing. And cannabis improved the quality of life quite substantially during those years. That led me to beginning my law firm with a specific focus on the cannabis industry, and accordingly opening up some of the first dispensaries in the Western United States, state by state. And here we are today.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm so sorry to hear about your mother, but I'm so thankful that you found cannabis to help out with that quality of life. It's something that we don't talk about very often in regards to the quality of life when people, are at that stage. So it's just wonderful to hear you speak of it and have the courage and just allowing us, possibly in the future, for our parents, for our family members, to maybe even think about that and go that route. So thank you. But wow. Okay. So an attorney with a specification in regards to cannabis, if you can maybe give us a little bit more insight on just really what you're doing with cannabis today.
So great question. So again, I started this law firm, my law firm, the Hoben Law Group, almost 13 years ago now. I started it with a focus on bringing commercial practice, higher level, sophisticated legal practice for businesses involving transactions, contracts, employment law, land use, zoning, real estate, regulatory compliance. I brought all of those things to the table with the law firm and the team that I built early. What we found in the early stages, and this was the pattern that developed in most states when you talk about marijuana in particular. Because when I talk about cannabis, by the way, when I talk about cannabis, cannabis is the plant, and cannabis as an industry really has two distinct sectors. It's got the marijuana sector, which in the U.S. is over-the-counter marijuana. It's dispensary distribution, whereas the hemp side of the industry, the hemp sector, has less of the intoxicating THC, but also is something that is thriving and that we helped develop. So cannabis has two distinct sectors. Now, in the early days, we found most of the marijuana business attorneys were criminal defense attorneys, and that's a skill, despite the fact that I was a trial lawyer for many years, and on the civil side, commercial litigation, I would never try a civil case, and I found it odd that so many of these criminal practitioners were trying to test their mettle at transactional work, legal, corporate work, legal work that required a more sophisticated perspective, or perhaps more learned perspective as to what encompasses business transactions. It's not as simple as pulling a form off of the internet, as we saw so many people do, and so many people still do to this day. So we filled that void. That was the opportunity to build a business that we saw. That was, of course, grounded in my mother's story and understanding that those two things led me to build a law firm that ultimately became the largest cannabis-centric law firm in the world. And I sold that law firm in July of 2021, coming up a little bit past my 1-year anniversary now with Clark Hill. So that's the rough path. In doing so, Kimberly, we opened dispensaries in the first places for the first time in many places across the country. We opened offices in those places. We actually began what became the CBD industry. We sued the federal government and achieved a favorable result to our clients, which smashed the doors open on CBD, and have been involved in public policy, having written legislation and regulations for over 35 countries around the world, and very much engaged in international transactions in the cannabis space. You talk about sort of not necessarily it's something that a lot of people don't talk about with regard to using cannabis perhaps for cancer. But what a lot of people don't understand is that the global cannabis industry is worth, by 2025, about $75 billion. About half of that's attributable to the U.S., and about half of that's attributable to the aggregate in the world. So those are the trends that we not only follow, that we've in effect created. And it's been just a whirlwind, but gosh, the most exciting way to practice law, that's for sure.
Well, I couldn't thank you enough for all of your hard work, dedication, and belief in this wonderful plant. The fact that you actually sued the government just proves that you are a force to be reckoned with, especially when it comes to something you believe in. So thank you for all of your hard work. As far as obviously where it was just 3 years ago, for example, you're in Colorado, I'm in Colorado, it was a different story. We've grown, obviously, thanks to you and your team and many others. But what are your thoughts on what cannabis looks like now compared to possibly what it'll look like in about 3 years? Do you think the federal government will make things more legal? So I, as a CBD, one of my companies can now market, even though it doesn't have THC in it. I mean, these are like the questions I think that are on everybody's mind. And I just hoping that, you know, just let me know your honest thoughts.
No, they're great questions. So fundamentally, let's start there, right? When you talk fundamentally, marijuana and hemp are different. Same plant, exact same plant, but marijuana and hemp are different in terms of their genetic makeup. But the legal distinction is what matters here. So the legal distinction between marijuana and hemp is the THC percentage. THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, that is the psychoactive. That's what produces the high. Okay, it's called a cannabinoid. So it's considered marijuana and therefore federally illegal if it's 0.3% of the dry weight or above of that delta 9 THC. If it's below that threshold, it's considered hemp. Hemp is 100% federally legal and is legal accordingly in just about every state that has an agricultural program that falls in line with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Where we have a little bit of a trouble with CBD from hemp, even though it's not intoxicating, is that the FDA has authority over it, but the FDA hasn't issued any rules or guidelines yet. So the states have filled the void, and it's a little bit of a patchwork. Now, on the marijuana side, unequivocally federally illegal. States have made it legal, but you have this sort of dichotomy where the federal government says, no, there's just no valid use for marijuana. It's a Schedule I drug, meaning high potential for abuse, no medicinal benefit. Well, look, there are thousands and thousands of studies around the world that show it, in fact, has a medicinal benefit. So the history there is interesting, and I won't dwell on it too much unless you want to get into it. But we had a Bureau of Narcotics chief almost 100 years ago named Harry Anslinger. He was a racist. He was a xenophobe. He was the one that, in effect, drove marijuana, hemp and marijuana, all towards being a controlled substance and being illegal, because it was this moralistic, this sort of paternalistic and moralistic perspective on American society. So that's where it was driven. It was deemed to be this very harmful plant. Well, here we are, 100 years later, give or take 10 or 15 years. And we know that the plant's not harmful. In fact, it's actually beneficial to your endocannabinoid system in your body, which interacts with the plant. So that's a little bit more than you asked for, but that helps frame what's potentially going to happen next. So the Biden administration has said that they would like to see, nonviolent criminal offenders involving marijuana not have to suffer behind bars. We've seen, but that's more talk than action. We don't believe the Biden administration really cares for cannabis legalization. Congress has, in various ways, presented bills over the last 5 years from the Democrats and the Republicans and from bipartisan groups that would effectively remove it from the schedules of the most restrictive setting. But we just haven't seen any movement yet. Even in the last couple of weeks, we had Senator Schumer, we had Senator Booker, we even had some Republican measures from Representative Mace on our side move forward with potential cannabis commercialization measures. But in a midterm election year, it's not likely that anything will pass. And without leadership from the White House, it's furthermore not likely that something's going to pass. And there is absolutely zero leadership on this issue in our White House.
Is there anything that we can do in the public as business owners, small business owners, as just, people who believe in this beautiful plant? Is there anything we can do? I mean, we could write letters, but at this point in time, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's part of it, right? Here's a story I remember from 2012. Pretty sure I got that right. 2012 is when we voted in Colorado to legalize adult use cannabis. So that year, there's a story, and that, of course, that election was in November. There's a story that around Thanksgiving, then U.S. Attorney from Colorado, Troy Ide, I believe former Governor Bill Owens, Republican, and current governor at the time, Bill Ritter, all happened to meet at the airport, going away to visit family for Thanksgiving. And they said, can you believe that we just legalized marijuana? We, and guess what? What it was, Washington State as well at the time. I think we beat them just because of the time zone in terms of the polls being closed. But they were so out of touch as politicians that they had no idea that the general population wanted cannabis to be legal. And by the way, the statistics would indicate you don't have to be a cannabis user to want it to make it legal. It just doesn't stand to reason that it's an illegal controlled substance anymore. And I think that story tells us what I think we're seeing in DC, to your question. I don't think politicians recognize that. I think it's 70% of the population, which goes across Republican and Democrat boundaries, to say they want cannabis legalized. But the federal government doesn't really have any motivation. I work around the world, as I mentioned, with governments that want to do this. I don't think our federal government has identified its why. Why legalize it? That's the thing that we can do as citizens, is try to communicate with people who will in turn communicate with our politicians to begin to build the case for the why. Is the why criminal justice reform, social justice reform, Let's stop affecting people of color primarily that get affected and get jailed and really have no upside because they lose the ability to get student loans, et cetera. Or is it about jobs and economy? So all of those things contribute to the quote unquote why, but we don't have one as a country yet. And certainly I believe we need a why for the federal government to push this over the bump. So I think it's just about education, continuing to educate people about what's happening and continuing to ask questions and then voice your opinion, that you are that vocal majority who says, regardless of whether you use cannabis, it's just not a qualifier. I think it should be legal, and here's why. And I think that that's the thing that we can do.
I love that. I love that. But if we could just simplify it just even more elementary style for folks like me, sure. What would we do? How can I go about vocalizing my opinion? What should I do? What's my first step?
Well, I mean, look, I think social media is a very powerful tool. We know it's a powerful tool, frankly, right? So regardless of what I think, but I think it's integrating news that you see that involves the cannabis industry into your typical commentary, your likes, your dislikes, and the equivalent there, so that people that follow you, for example, then they might follow a particular person because that person always maybe comments on or has a nice take on something that's happening in the news. But when they see a cannabis story, they're used to seeing cannabis stories from people that are cannabis activists. But when they see people that are involved in business, quote unquote, normal, mainstream human beings involved in business and opining at business at a high level, I think it begins to change the narrative. And it really is that simple, Kimberly. I just think people are so out of touch. Even at the law firm that I work at right now, when I came on, it's controversial. Here's the pot guy, right? And of course, we've been given the opportunity because we work hard and we do everything above board and professional. But I think that even the hundreds of attorneys at our firm, they looked at it and they said, why are we doing this? This is about Snoop Dogg. Don't we have something better to do? Not that there's anything wrong with Snoop Dogg, but that's, I think, the narrow perception of what we're talking about. Instead of a plant that has 50,000 uses and really can change global economies, regardless of whether you're smoking it or not. That's the message. And I think if you begin to integrate that into your existing feeds on social media, people are going to take notice and they're going to ask questions, and that promotes the educational component.
I love this. I absolutely love this. This is so key. I haven't heard this from anybody, to be honest with you. Little tidbits here and there, but this is a wonderful path to go on. So the fact that your insight is so profound, I would love to possibly, create additional, segments within the CBD and maybe get some insight from others on what they'd like to learn about. Of course, if you have 10, 15 minutes in the near future. But as far as your thoughts on what you're currently doing, I guess it would be with GPS, and then as you are the chair of the cannabis group for Clark Hill, what are you working with cannabis in regards to GPS as well, or how is that all?
Yeah. It's a great question. So at the law firm, first of all, my world involves cannabis every single day, and it has for 13 years in terms of just understanding what's happening in the marketplace, policy, legal, operations, strategy, all of the above. And because it's a new industry, it's hard to find people to trust, or at least that's the report that we got over the years. So lawyers, not always liked in certain circles, but when you have a lawyer, you almost implicitly entrust that lawyer. Lawyers, there is a respect for lawyers as being professionals, although some lawyers don't always give us a great name, right? But when you have that respect and that trust in place, that's what we build upon in our legal practice, right? We help with transactions, regulations, tax strategies, connecting people, ensuring that everybody's compliant with their regulatory obligations, ensuring that their intellectual property is protected. So that's the group that we work with at Clark Hill, which is almost 100 strong, working in the industry on a daily basis. Now, the consulting firm also is engaged exclusively in the cannabis industry. And let me talk about psychedelics in just a moment in terms of how that might play into all of this. But it's also engaged exclusively in the cannabis industry, but it does actual operational build-outs. So I own the company, I founded the company, but it runs on its own. There are some projects that I'm involved in as a consultant on the GPS side, but largely it's 13 employees man our projects that happen across the US and around the world. But that's the piece of it. So lawyers do lawyer things, provide strategic advisory, make sure things are done in compliance with the law and that our clients are protected in transactions. And on the operational side, that's really what GPS does. We build out companies from scratch. When an investor from India, as an example, with one of our flagship projects, calls us and says, I've got the deep desire to be in this space. Here's my background. I've got $50 million to spend and I can't trust anybody. At least you're a lawyer and I can see that you've been in the industry for 12 years with your thought leadership pieces and otherwise. Let's work with you. Well, can't work with me. I can't work two jobs at the same time. So that's why we created the entity. So that's really the distinction between the two. We've got projects going on all over the world and it's pretty exciting. They're doing the actual build out. And then of course, some of the legal work is done in attachment with those clients as well. But I will note psychedelics is sort of an emerging concept, whether that's psilocybin, other natural remedies that assist with depression, anxiety, and the like. We're seeing more and more traction, and we're seeing actually quite substantial movement with local governments and the FDA or those equivalents. It's remarkable to me that people are so much more willing to fast track the legalization of things like psilocybin versus marijuana, which, I think both are certainly beneficial scientifically to the human body. But I don't know, you'd think that the psychedelic side of things would be a lot more controversial than the cannabis side of things. But unfortunately, or fortunately, it's not.
Absolutely. I completely agree. It's very interesting to me, but it's very exciting. I'm so excited. I do have a wonderful friend who does uses ketamine for her therapy. She's a licensed therapist. So I just that alone, bringing that into the world along with your, like you said, the natural elements of these different plants or mushrooms, whatever it is, to help us, guide us, pull us out of our own ego, do so many different things is wonderful. But like you said, it's so interesting how fast that's moving compared to the cannabis route.
Seriously,
it's crazy.
Well, but to your point, though, just a quick note on the ketamine. So when you have a new industry, you're always concerned about distribution. Where am I going to sell it? How am I going to make $1? Well, the bet for distribution of psychedelics is that in the future, ketamine clinics, which exist in so many places today, to your point, that those ketamine clinics will actually be retooled and be utilized as distribution for all forms of psychedelics and natural plant treatments like that. So that's the bet, and that's what we've been doing. We've been acquiring ketamine clinics all over the country on behalf of our clients so that they have distribution on a bet for the future, in addition to doing clinical trials and IP protection in that same space and raising money. So, but yeah, you make a good point. It's amazing that one seems fast tracked and the other just sort of sits there spinning its wheels, being cannabis, and should have never been that way.
Absolutely agreed. I know we only have 2 more minutes. I know you're a busy man. Just a few questions. Where can we find you online, social media, LinkedIn, and so on? If you could give us your information.
Sure. Well, I do have a website, bobhoban.com, BOBHOBAN.com. That does have it houses almost 10 years of content. It houses our podcast, the Hoben Minute. It houses my Forbes columns. So there's a lot of information there, but primarily you can reach out to me by email. I still respond to emails and I'm very engaged that way. It's R as in Robert, R Hoben at clarkhill.com.
Wonderful. Perfect. So last question, it's a little off topic, but what advice would you give to your younger self, even pre-law, to help guide you through your path today?
Oh, that's a great question. It's the advice that I would have given myself is advice I had gotten from one of the attorneys that worked for me about 10 or 11 years ago. And they just said, Bob, always be yourself. Never hesitate. If you feel like you're not polished enough, or if you feel like you're not prepared enough, that's a good thing. Get yourself on top of it and just be yourself. be honest, and be yourself. And ever since I've sort of took that to the extreme in how I interact with people on a regular basis, it doesn't always fit with people's expectation of a lawyer. It doesn't always fit with people's expectation of people to work within the industry. But if you are yourself, it's authentic. People sniff that out, and people want to be around people that are their authentic selves. And I believe that's the key to my success in so many ways, in addition to just working hard. There is no such thing as work smarter, not harder. Even if you can work smarter, you got to work harder, because other people are doing that too if you want to keep up. So those are the words of wisdom I would impart if called upon.
That's amazing. Wonderful. Yes. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate your time. I am so thankful. I can't wait to get this out. Thank you so much, Robert. This was amazing.
Well, it's my pleasure. Please don't hesitate to reach out, and would love to do it again.